All right, now let's bring in former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss. Liz, it's wonderful to have you on a historic day like this between our two countries. Just your reaction as we watch these live shots unfold as the president is about to meet with the current UK Prime Minister. What do you think can be achieved today, and your reaction overall to the president's visit?
Well, it's been an absolutely fabulous spectacle. I think you've seen the best of British pomp, and it's all been laid on for President Trump. And what is so fantastic is how pro-British President Trump is. You know, he made a speech last night talking about the ancient liberties that were developed in Britain that were, impressed in America. He is such a fan of our country, and what we are hoping for from this visit is to build that relationship, more investment in Britain, a deeper trade deal with Britain. And I want him to call Keir Starmer out on the problems we've got with free speech, the problems we've got with immigration, because I think we could learn a lot from what President Trump is doing in the United States.
Yeah, and we've obviously seen recent protests just this weekend. So many of the British people rising up and saying, look, free speech started in England. Is it going to die in England with the current laws under the Keir Starmer administration? And sort of to that end, whether it's free speech, whether it's the budget, whether it's a whole host of issues, can Keir Starmer save his prime ministership with today's bylat, Liz?
Well, he needs to massively change course, because we've got a huge problem with illegal immigrants coming over the channel. We've got a huge problem with free speech. Recently a comedian was arrested at the airport for posting on X. We've had people jailed for what they posted on social media. So he has to do a complete about turn, and I hope he listens to President Trump and what President Trump has to say. Now, I don't have a great deal of hope for that, but I think this visit is certainly bolstering Britain. And we're very envious. We look across the Atlantic and we see all these fantastic things happening in America: cheap energy, drill baby drill, dealing properly with immigration, deporting people, freedom of speech. And we want some of it here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because as we watch the president walk up to greet the current prime minister, we're going to just take a minute to listen to the sights and sounds here. And there's the handshake and the two world leaders discussing the day's events. And, it is interesting because these two people, they're very politically in opposition of each other, but they do tend to have a warm relationship. Why do you think that is?
Well, I give credit to Keir Starmer. He did strike the first trade deal with America after President Trump announced his new trade strategy. So he has done a good job of reaching out to the United States. It's probably the one good thing he's done during his period in office. And President Trump, as I said, is a huge Anglophile. He talked yesterday positively about the British Empire, positively about Britain's effect on the world, about the ideas that came from this country, like free speech. And I think President Trump, regardless of who the prime minister is in Britain, is always going to have a positive attitude to our country. And frankly, we need his help.
I don't mean to begin to think what's going to happen behind closed doors today, but my gut tells me Keir Starmer is going to want to steer the entire discussion toward business, toward trade, when it comes to bringing businesses to the UK and money stuff, if you will. I don't think he's going to want to focus on Ukraine and Gaza, but I ultimately think the president will try to push the conversation in that direction. Are you expecting any news to come out on the foreign policy front when it comes to the war in Ukraine, when it comes to the war in Gaza? And if so, what do you think the president could get the prime minister to agree to that isn't already agreed to?
Well, I think we are certainly hearing rumors that progress may be made on Ukraine. That's what I've been hearing. I'm not so sure on the Gaza front. I think there is a very different view taken by our prime minister, a very wrong view, in my view, on Israel and Gaza. But I think what President Trump will also be pushing are issues like the tax on American tech companies, are issues like free speech. J.D. Vance has spoken out on free speech. When President Trump was here recently hosting at Trump Turnberry, he raised the issue of free speech. So I think in exchange for all of this new business, all of this new investment, I don't believe Trump is going to give it for free. You know, it's the art of the deal. I think there will be demands from Britain, and I hope those demands are restoring free speech in our country and getting rid of these nonsense taxes on the digital industry.
Why do you think the president was invited to a second state visit? What does that say about him as a leader?
Well, it shows the important nature of the United States, but also President Trump. You know, he is one of the few, I think maybe the only American president to serve two terms that are not linked where there has been a gap. And I think in that period, you know, we had President Biden, who frankly was not interested in Britain. You know, he wanted to deal with the EU. He was pretty anti-British in what he said. So we've now got a president, and I think that is recognized on all sides of the political divide, who is very, very pro-British, and we're going to make the most of that.
Just quickly, in about 20 seconds we have remaining, we've talked so much over the last 2 days about the vibe toward President Trump being different than it was during his previous visit. Just 20 seconds. Describe that in your own words, Liz.
Well, I think people in Britain are beginning to understand how our country needs to change. And they're looking at President Trump and they're seeing real leadership across the Atlantic. And the demonstration we saw at the weekend with people with their British flags, their English flags out, that is the start of a Make Europe Great Again movement. And I think we are seeing the MAGA effect now, which we just weren't seeing in 2016, 2017.
Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, it's an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
you so much.
You're very welcome.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.